these powerful experiences are meant to change us. They're meant to reshape us and to form who we are becoming. And so allow yourself to change. I don't want to see them while they're dying. I want to remember them how they were when they were vibrant. And I've always had long talks with them, like, you will miss something really valuable and really important if you don't go. I think somehow people get more clarity and things open up for them. They can see it differently the closer they get to death. I think we all have this expectation that somehow we're supposed to do something huge and monumental in our lives. And really, it's really the little things, the time I took to go for a walk on the beach, or spent in nature, or planted a flower, or that's where the deepest meaning lies.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. And today I am absolutely honored to have as our guest Dr. Karen Wyatt. She is a best-selling author of the book 7 Lessons for Living from the Dying, formerly titled What Really Matters, which contains stories of patients she cared for as a hospice doctor and the spiritual lessons she learned from them at the end of their lives. Her other books include The Journey from Ego to Soul, Stories from the Dark Night, and The Tao of Death. Dr. Wyatt also hosts the End of Life University podcast, which features conversations with experts who work in all aspects of end-of-life care. She is widely regarded as a thought leader in the effort to transform the way we care for our dying in the United States. In addition, she is valued for her application of spiritual principles to illness and healthcare, and teaches that in order to live fully, we must each overcome our fear of death and embrace the difficulties that life brings us. Welcome, Karen. And as I said just before we pressed record, I've been following you for so many years, so it's such a great pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thanks for having me as your guest.
So let's start with just having you talk a little bit about yourself and your journey as as a hospice doctor. You bear witness to the sacredness of someone's passing. And your book, 7 Lessons for Living from the Dying, kind of explores those insights. So just if you could tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and how your perspective of life changed because of your experiences.
Well, there's so much, as you know, our journeys, we end up being shaped by so many different experiences through a lifetime. And probably the beginning of the book actually started when my father died suddenly by suicide. And this happened at a time in my life when I was a young doctor, a family practice doctor, fairly new out of training. I was a wife and a mom and had 2 little babies, 2 years old and 4 months old. And my dad took his own life. And it absolutely shattered me. And in so many ways, as you can imagine, but as a daughter, losing my father, but also as a doctor and thinking, I've been trained in behavioral health and mental health, and I couldn't even help my own dad. And beyond that, I came into medicine with this spiritual philosophy that love heals. And I had to question every belief I had, because I looked at it and thought, my dad is one of the people I love the most. How can I say love heals? I'm a doctor and I love my dad, and I could not save him. So I was just completely devastated with grief. And for in those first few years, because I was so busy as a mom and a doctor, I just shoved my grief down and aside, which is common.
Yes.
I mean, as you know that too, it's like it was overwhelming. It was too much to deal with. So I just repressed it all, kind of refused to go there and feel the pain of it. And I remember one day my office manager, she saw a picture of me from before my dad died, and she said, oh, I miss that smile. And she said, I wonder if we'll ever see it again. And suddenly I realized, oh my goodness, like she's right. Like I haven't felt joy in 3 years, and that's not right. Something's wrong. And so I kind of said this silent little request, like I need help to figure out how do I handle this grief. I got this intuitive inspiration that I should call hospice, which I didn't know anything about at the time. Honestly, in medical training, I had no exposure to hospice. I didn't know exactly what hospice did. I knew it had something to do with death and dying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, maybe I could be a volunteer, whatever it is they do. I went in and looked up in the yellow pages back then that we used to
Yeah.
have and called our local hospice. I found out we actually had one and didn't even know that before, and said, I'm a doctor. Is there anything I could do as a volunteer for you? The person on the phone said, well, our medical director just resigned 30 minutes ago, and we've been frantic trying to figure out who could replace her. And then you just call us out of the blue. And I said, wait, what? What does your medical director do? And she just said, they just said, come down and meet us. We think you're meant to work with us somehow. And it was, I just did it because somehow in my heart I knew, like, okay, I asked for a way to
Yeah.
to get better. I asked for a way to work through my grief, and this must be it. So I started volunteering with them, training with nurses, and making home visits to patients. And immediately I knew this is where I'm meant to be. This is the place. This is the work. I actually felt like, wow, this is the first time I felt as a doctor like this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing here, and sitting at the bedside of patients who were facing death and families dealing with so much grief. I suddenly was able to just relax and allow my own grief to come to the surface and to feel like I'm not the only person dealing with grief here. I'm not alone. This is a part of life. And that's when I really started processing my own grief while I was seeing patients. So that's the beginning of the story and what brought me into hospice in the first place. I eventually left my medical practice and started doing hospice full time because it was such powerful work.
Mm-hmm.
So over the years, I just felt myself growing and growing, listening to stories from patients, hearing about what they had learned from life and as they were facing death and looking back on their own lives and taking all of that in and really developing my own spiritual practice because of what I was learning from patients. Ultimately, years later, that all turned into a book. I just felt like I need to write some of these stories down, and I need to talk about these things that I had learned by being around people who were dying, and to start sharing them.
Yeah. So from those experiences, just share a little bit about some of those lessons.
The first thing, as I mentioned before, was just to recognize that grief and heartache and pain and loss are part of life. And I guess I had not accepted that. I thought my view of love is the important thing meant I could focus always on love, which I thought was just always a happy, joyful, positive thing. And I needed to make space in my heart and my worldview for the pain that life brings us all the time, constantly, to everyone. That was a big new reality that I needed to embrace. It was so important for me moving forward. And even to be a good doctor, I needed to understand that. So that was probably the first lesson I would say that I learned, is how to make space and allow for pain and grief and heartache to be part of life and make space for it.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, I gradually came back to this idea of love because all of my hospice patients talked about it, like, oh, who I have loved in my life, that's the most important thing to me right now as I'm at the end. Love is the thing that actually matters more than anything. Some of them said, I neglected love. I rejected the people that cared about me. I didn't I didn't give any time to love and to growing in love. And some of them wanted us to call people they hadn't spoken to for 20 years and wanted to make amends with people, which was the next lesson, very powerful lesson of being able to forgive and let go of the past. All of those were such powerful lessons for me as I was going through my own process of grief and understanding I had to forgive my dad for his
Mhm.
choice to end his life, because I was harboring a lot of silent anger in a way inside that
Mhm.
I had to learn how to let go of, and how to forgive him, and how to forgive myself for worrying that I hadn't done enough, or somehow I hadn't stopped him or helped him or saved him.
Yeah. Um, so when you're working with someone who is facing imminent death, um, finding peace and meaning in their final days, how what has been your experience with your patients as they work through that? Um,
Yes, I've seen. Well, essentially everyone wants to look back and wonders, like, did I live my life well? Did I fulfill my purpose? Did my life have any meaning? And my approach with patients would just be to start asking them questions and ask them to tell me their stories of things. Sometimes people felt they hadn't done anything special, so their life didn't really have meaning or purpose. They felt a lot of angst about that and worrying that I didn't do anything special. I didn't really accomplish anything. But as I listened to their stories, I could always point out, you did that? Oh my goodness, you did that? I would point out the things to me that sounded amazing and wonderful to help them kind of reframe how they looked at their own lives. Because I think we all have this expectation that somehow we're supposed to do something huge and monumental in our lives, and really it's about the small things. It's the very small things that we do that actually give the most meaning to life, and being able to help point that out to people um, sometimes made all the difference when I could help them look at their own life differently. And then again, that helped me look at my life too and realize, oh, it's the smallest things I do from day to day that are the most important. And even being a doctor or whatever I feel I may have accomplished, it's really the little things, the time I took to go for a walk on the beach, or spent in nature, or planted a flower, or baked cookies for a neighbor, or whatever. It's just the little things. That's where the deepest meaning lies.
that's so beautiful and so true. And it's so nice that that you are able to offer that different perspective as they did kind of that life review, to show them, because you're right, so many people don't realize the impact that they have, on others or just life in general. And you get to the end of your life and you're kind of going through the list. I myself come from a nursing background and I worked in oncology for a number of years. And I always found it so interesting having those conversations with people about their lives. And I felt very much the same as you, is that I would hear things and be so amazed, whereas they kind of discounted those
Hmm.
events as not being very impactful. Um, Talk to me about forgiveness, because that is such a huge thing. I know you touched on it, when we were talking about your dad. Um, but when people are at the end of their life and they are reviewing, kind of that, doing that review, and things come up about forgiveness, how do they work through that? How do you help them work through that?
Well, it's an interesting time, because when people are facing the very end of life and they know their days are limited, it changes their perspective on everything, and even looking backwards, I've found. And so many people told me, I just want to feel at peace. I just want to have peace inside. And they knew they didn't have it. And they knew there was something that they'd been putting off for a long time, or something that had been stored up inside that they needed to look at. And so trying to get to the bottom of that a little bit, and also telling them, like forgiveness may seem like, oh my gosh, it's a huge task. I have to work on this for years in order to forgive someone. But it can just be as simple as a shift in mindset again, and how you look at things. And so helping people realize it, even the idea of feeling forgiven by someone else, they have to start by forgiving themselves, and by realizing, like, I did the best I could at the time, and not holding on to a lot of guilt or self blame.
Mm.
So a lot of times, again, it's really in listening to people's stories and letting them talk about it. Oftentimes they find the answer themselves, or they suddenly find that the way they look at it is changing. And I remember one woman told me, I, I, I have had a terrible relationship with my sister all of our lives, but I've forgiven her. I just haven't talked to her for 10 years, but I've forgiven her. And I said, oh, okay. And are you sure are you sure you're complete with all that? And she said, yes, I'm not mad at her at all, but I haven't talked to her. And then about 2 weeks before she died, she said to me, I need to talk to my sister. And she said, even though I feel like I've forgiven her, I haven't told her I love her. And she called her sister, and they had a wonderful conversation. It was like, there was just one more step that maybe she needed to take to kind of bring that relationship a little bit closer again. But she couldn't see that until she got very close to the end. I think somehow people get more clarity and things open up for them. They can see it differently the
Mhm.
closer they get to death. That's how it appeared to me, at least. Um,
That's so interesting that you say that, and we talk about stories, because I feel, everybody has a story of, their own life journey, and it's in the sharing of those stories that we learn from each other, and we become wiser. Um, and the clarity that comes at the end of life. And it's not only for the person who is dying, it's also for the people around them who love them. And one of the things that I started all of this work from a personal loss from of my own, and I always described it as, God shot a flare up into the night sky of my life, and everything was illuminated, and I
mm.
could see what mattered, and I was scrambling to write it all down and remember it, because I didn't want to forget it when the light went out. Um, Talk to me about the clarity that you see some people have, both on the family side and in the people that you're caring for.
Yeah, I think, oh, that's so true. And I love that image of the flare in the night sky and being able to see it all clearly, which in a personal way, I had that experience when my own mother was dying, and I was at the bedside taking care of her. And it's like in a single week before she died, the two of us, it was an amazing thing, that I just saw all of these old resentments I had had and issues I'd had with her, one after another, becoming so apparent to me in the moment. I could see it so clearly what it was. I saw completely through it, and then it just kind of dissolved away. And over a week's time, it was just this powerful revelation to me of, oh my goodness, all these things that happened. I mean, at the time, yes, they were significant. Yes, they were hurtful things. Yes, there was pain. But compared to this moment where we are right now, as we're living through the last days of her life, it's all fine. Like, that all in some ways like shaped our relationship and shaped who I am. And everything shifted. It's like everything fell into a different place in my memory and a different place in my mind and heart, because I saw it all so differently from that perspective in those last days. And it was so powerful. so
Mhm.
powerful. And she felt it too, because some of the things she said to me, I realized she was having the same kind of realizations and awakening. So that was my own personal experience with it. But I also witnessed it with so many families coming together. Sometimes it was the families caring for their parent or sibling who realized all of the old things they'd held on to, and the old beliefs they had about one another, the way they described each other that had been with them since childhood.
Yeah.
Realizing, oh, why did I make that be true? Because it isn't really. There's so much more about this person than what I knew. And so for families, I think the very act of coming together to care for someone who's dying, that alone is a huge, powerful opening and sacrifice,
Yeah.
and such a ripe time to really, really be present, and when healing can happen. And then, uh, yeah, go ahead.
So, but in do you find, because there's a lot of people, and I see this in the work that I do, there's a lot of people who fear death and who are very uncomfortable around the concept of someone that they care about passing. And so, how can we help those individuals? Because I think the way that you described that, as you were just talking about the moment with your mother, I was thinking about sitting with my sister, and she made this conscious decision to have what I would call a good death.
Hmm.
Um, she was a beautiful, remarkable woman, who I think about every single day. But we had the guitar in the room. We all were singing. We took moments to tell stories. She had moments where she was, with each person individually, siblings, children. And it was a life-changing experience for me because I watched her show, and she was in remarkable pain. She had cancer, but I watched her show and give such grace
Hmm.
to the people around her. Um, it changed who I was as a person. I think about that every day, the kindness that she showed all of us, when she was the one who was passing, and then really realizing, then reflecting over her own life, that was who she was all along. And maybe, as siblings, I didn't notice it all of the time, but that was who her essence was, at the very center of it. But so many times you see people who are afraid of death, when in fact, it's just as normal as birth, right? It's, it's,
Mhm.
it's a natural part of our life cycle. How do we get people to become comfortable so that they can have those moments? How do we help people, let go of that fear?
That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, actually, was because I recognized what a profound experience it had been for me, this opportunity to sit with so many people at the end of their lives and seeing what happened for their family or loved ones, whoever they were with who were doing the caregiving. And I realized not everyone experiences this because they stay away. They don't show up. They don't want to be around death. I wanted to tell those positive stories and really remarkable stories of healing and transformation that can occur, hoping that I would inspire people. From the book, I ended up doing a podcast because I realized not everyone reads, not
Yeah.
everyone will pick up a book like this. So maybe a podcast, some people will stumble across it and will listen and will hear stories about it. Because I think one of the most powerful things we can do is tell these stories, because those who fear death the most are maybe those who haven't been exposed to it very much. So they have fears in their mind that they imagine what it must be like to be with someone who's dying, but they may not have had the experience for themselves to know what it is. So they stay away.
Mm-hmm.
out of that fear. So I feel like the more just having conversations like this and talking about it, sharing these beautiful stories is one way to reassure people. But in my own life, I've had people in my family and friends that I know who decided were thinking, I'm not going to go visit. I don't want to go see that person. I don't want to see them while they're dying. I want to remember them how they were when they were vibrant. And I've always had long talks with them, like, you will miss something really valuable and really important if you don't go. And reassuring them that it's not going to be as hard or as bad as you imagine that it will be.
Yeah.
And it's so important to just show up and be there, because it's your last chance, your only chance to do this. And I do know people who didn't go to be with a loved one and later regretted it, that they missed that opportunity. So I try to encourage everyone in my life that has that possibility to just show up and just be there when someone is at the end of life.
Mm-hmm. And so that kind of ties into our understanding of suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on suffering and embracing or understanding that suffering is part of our journey.
Yeah, as I said, that was really, I couldn't begin to deal with my own grief until I began to accept that this is natural and normal. Like, death just happens to everyone. It is part of life. That, and I thought about how strange it was that I was rejecting it as if wasn't right. It wasn't the right thing. It should never have happened, when in fact it happens for everyone. So I think in the beginning, I usually, if I'm talking with someone who's really scared of thinking about it, I just use images from nature and talk about a garden and how, the plants in the garden in the fall and winter die away, but they nourish the soil, and then new plants can grow the next year. But that's all part of a cycle. And that's how nature works. That's how life works. And even human life is like that. Eventually, we give up the bodies that we're in. And but even beyond that, there's so much more. The process of giving up those bodies is actually a really powerful transformation spiritually for us to grow. So again, I guess it's telling stories and to try to use illustrations to help people get comfortable with the idea that death is really all around us all the time if you start noticing it.
Mm-hmm. And I love the connection to nature. That was a huge educator for me. Nature, when I was deep in grief, that it helped me understand exactly what you were saying. I thought um, it just reflected a lot of the ways that I was feeling at the time, and was so incredibly helpful. Um, because where does spirituality fit into this? So into that conversation, people who show up in hospice are from all different walks of life, different belief systems. And so, how does spirituality fit into the work that you do?
For me, I guess my own definition of spirituality, I borrowed this from someone else, but who said your spirituality is really whatever you focus on, whatever you believe has the deepest meaning for your life. So for some people, it might be a religion and religious practices, but other people may have other things that they love and that they cherish the most in their lives, and that might be how spirituality shows up in their lives. So I view it as that inner part of ourselves, the deeper part of ourselves that is beyond the physical, and what makes that part of us light up and feel fulfilled in life. And so that takes away any connection to any particular religion or any particular belief system. Because one of our patients, I love telling this story, um, our staff kept trying to get him. They wanted him to see the chaplain as he was getting close to death, and he refused. And they kept trying to find out. We don't know what his beliefs are. We don't know what he needs to work on. We don't know if he needs to forgive someone. He won't talk to us. The only thing he talks about is baseball. He loves baseball. And he lives and breathes it, and he won't talk about anything else. And so I thought about it, and I thought, I think baseball is his spirituality. I think that's what matters to him. So I decided, okay, I don't know very much about baseball, but I'm going to take whatever I do know. I'm just going to go sit down and talk to him about baseball, because we had tried all these other conversations that didn't go anywhere with him. And I just let him go on and on. He told me all about his favorite teams, why he loved baseball, the special games he'd attended. And I listened to all of it. And I got into it with him, like, wow, that's really interesting. So I validated that this is his thing. This is what gave his life joy and meaning. And at the very end of that conversation, he got a little bit wistful and was looking off in the distance. And he said, you know, I was married once and I had a son, and I haven't seen him since he was a boy. And he got tears in his eyes, and he said, my biggest regret is that I never got to take him to a baseball game. And at that moment, like, oh, we had our inroad into what he needed closure on, what he needed to talk about more. But it was by going through baseball that we got there. We had to stop shoving the baseball away. Baseball is his spirituality, and let's accept that and validate it and honor him for that.
Yeah.
And so that's how we ended up finally helping him come to terms with his deepest pain underneath all of that.
Oh my gosh, that's just so amazing. And how that baseball was the path that led you to it, that led you to that part where the love intersected in his life. And oh, that is beautiful. Hey guys, Kelly here. I wanted to jump in and let you know that you can find out more about my work by visiting my website at kellybuckley.com, or you can find my books on Amazon. Okay, back to the episode. What about gratitude? How does that I talk a lot about gratitude with the work that I do. And not gratitude for simple little things, because I feel sometimes when we are suffering, that it's to expect that we can find grand things to be grateful for, and that truly the meaningful things at the end of the day are the tiny things, like you said, like a flower, like a hug. Talk to me about the relationship of gratitude when you're looking at end of life.
I think I wanted to bring that up because I noticed that is part of your work. And it took me a long time personally to get to the point of gratitude and understanding the power of gratitude. And but I saw it in some of my patients. Like, I saw some of my patients who surprised me, because when they were telling me their story, they'd start telling about things. Oh, I'm so grateful for this, and I am so grateful I had this wonderful doctor, and then I'm here. And they viewed their whole history and their whole story through this lens of gratitude. And I was so surprised by it. I didn't expect to see that at all. And over time, I started to contemplate that for myself. Like, that seems like it's something really powerful that has helped people a lot to experience gratitude. And I realized, like, that I wasn't practicing gratitude in my own life. And they actually taught me about that, to begin to be grateful for small things. And I understood it's kind of like the ego will reject the idea of gratitude because it looks at such a small picture of what life is, and primarily focuses on the negative things. And like, well, what's here to be grateful for? There's nothing here. But I realized, like, my higher self can see all, like, as you said, the tiny moments, the little things, all the beauty. And as soon as I started to get in touch with that, that also really helped me make a shift. But I understand, if we try to talk to people about gratitude, there's some people who really resist it, who feel like, what do you mean? There's nothing I can be in my life to be grateful for. And it's hard to explain to people that when you just begin to look for something. I loved your idea, the jolts, just one little thing.
Yeah.
If all you do is find one tiny thing to be grateful for in your life, it is so powerful how it just begins to shift your focus.
It does. And you, it was a practice that we used as a family, because my son was 12 at the time when his brother passed, and he deserved to have a happy life, and I had to find a way through. And so one little thing became kind of our anchor point. What's one little thing? Because there was plenty of days that it was really difficult to find one little thing on those dark early days of grief. Um, but I will tell you that there's a number of people, when I first started this and first started talking to the bereavement community, there's a few eyebrows that were raised, like, what are you talking about gratitude for? They didn't quite understand.
Mhm.
And I, as the years have passed, I think I've started to understand it a little bit better myself, in that we always think that gratitude is great when life is just flying along swimmingly, right? But the true measure of the strength of gratitude is when we're suffering, is when we can still find the little things to be thankful for in those moments of despair. That is where gratitude strength truly lies. But I think that people have to arrive to that conclusion at their own pace.
It's true. It's something it's hard to share. It's hard to convince someone that it works. But well, and even in the beginning, I was a skeptic. I didn't quite see it until I don't even know how I started to practice it, but started to realize, started actually thinking of all the things that I am grateful for in the moment on a day when I was really sick or something, and thinking, oh, but there are still so many things to be thankful for. What if I focus on that? I also started learning. I read The Buddha's Brain by Rick Hanson, and he talks about the fact that our brains tend to have a negativity bias. Our brains focus primarily on negative things, and that's a survival defense mechanism to make sure we're safe and keep us safe, and that we have to intentionally override that. And gratitude is one of the big practices for overriding the negative focus of the brain. But we have to learn about it, and we have to practice. We have to be exposed to it and then try it out, because it doesn't come naturally to us.
It doesn't, and it does take practice, and you do, like, there's also times, I will say, that you fall off the wagon, and you have to get back onto it, and start to, because you can break out of that practice of gratitude very easily, depending on what's happening, what's happening around you, what's happening in the world. If you get too caught up um, in things like that, which it's very easy to do these days, and it's you need to kind of find a moment where you can be still, and just disconnect from everything else around you, and just find that moment of stillness, uh, that you can anchor yourself, I think, to the present moment.
Mhm.
I like to talk about the present moment as, you're not looking back at the regrets of the past or forward at the worries of the future, that you're right here, right now, and you're okay. In the present moment, you are okay. And so that I used to say that over and over again, to remind myself that I was okay when I didn't really feel okay. Um, what would you say then to someone who one of their loved ones has passed? You've met the family in hospice, and they are leaving, and they're going to struggle with the grief and loss. What is some practical guidance that you would encourage them to do?
Hmm. Let me let me think about what I might say to them. I guess I wanted to go back to the idea of gratitude, that I think in some ways I'm wondering if it could be contagious, if if even in that situation, if I had worked with a family and their loved one at the end of life, if I were to say to them, I personally am really grateful that I had a chance to know your love, to get to know your loved one. I felt like I learned so much from them. I'm grateful that I got to share this experience with you and to get to know you. And I might say to them, I hope that you will find some peace and some grace as you go forward on this journey. I know that it's really hard. And by introducing that idea of being grateful
Mhm.
and also reminding them how special their loved one is and has been, and this special experience of being together, so that to give them just some little positive nuggets to hold on to in a way as they look back on the experience, and to remind them about some of the beautiful things that may have happened as they were together at the very end of life, so when they're reviewing it all, which they will, which I know they will, they'll go over everything and wonder if they did or said the right thing, to make sure they have something positive that I've pointed out to them that they'll remember. And the other thing that I've tried to do is to thank them for being a caregiver for their loved one, and to say, um, it's amazing that you are willing to be here for your person and give of yourself and your time to be here with them. And you've given them the greatest gift you could give by your willingness to be here, so that I'm leaving them again with that positive message that this was really something valuable that has happened here, something life-changing for them, and that they did the best they could, and there's gratitude for what they've given to their loved one, hoping that they'll take that away and they'll remember those words, because I know they're going to plunge into that time of wondering, did we do the right thing? Did I make the right decisions? Did I say the right things?
Yeah.
And by having heard that message, I just hope that that will stick with them in some way.
Mm. That's beautiful, and I love how that ties into the gratitude. I'm sorry. I keep thinking about my sister. She was just such a teacher in that way, because she was very vocal about her gratitude at the end of life, which encouraged us to do the same. And I think really changed the path that we probably took after she had passed. It was a beautiful thing. What's one misconception about grief that you've encountered that you think holds people back?
Hmm. I think the idea that it's an all negative or terrible experience, and that there isn't joy or humor within grief. And I think I suffered from that same mindset, which is why I just repressed it. Like, I don't have time to be grieving. I'm a mom and a doctor and a wife, and I have all these other things I'm doing, and I can't go there. I can't experience it. But when I finally did start diving into grief and found all this humor and love and even joy in the grief, like one day, my two of my uncles and one of my dad's close friends invited my husband and I to go out for a beer with them, and we went to my dad's favorite bar, and we sat around and we ordered my dad's favorite beer, and they were his drinking buddies who have been to that bar many times with my dad, and they just told us stories, and laughed nonstop about stories of my dad and things they'd done together. A whole side of my dad I never knew. I never went out for a beer with my dad, but here I was, like, getting this glimpse into his life. And I realized, when I was shut down and refusing to experience the grief, I would have not accepted that invitation. I never would have done it, because it didn't, I didn't want to go, I didn't want to talk about my dad. I didn't want to go hear any stories. I was shutting that out of my life. And so once I dove into the grief and allowed myself to feel it and look at it, it was amazing how many other experiences there were, and actually how much better I got to know my dad when I was willing to sit down and tell the stories and listen to them.
That's beautiful. And storytelling, we keep coming back to that theme of storytelling and how important that is, and um, how that truly creates that legacy for that person who has passed when we tell their stories. And it's so interesting. We us as siblings all got together after my sister's funeral, and we told some funny stories because she's a funny person. And you're right. I got to know a part of my sister that I didn't know that my brother knew.
Mhm.
But it was because we were open to talking about it and just not walking that path of grief alone. And I think that's an important lesson for our listeners, is that don't walk the path alone. And if you don't have someone who knew your loved one who passed, meet with a friend and say, I want to tell you about my mother. I want to tell you about my dad, and share those stories. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to walk that path alone.
That's so true. For me, in the beginning, because my dad's death was a suicide and there's so much stigma around it, I had a hard time sharing it or talking about it with other people outside the family that I knew. I was really fearful of hearing the other people would say something judgmental about my dad, or just something hurtful. And I found myself really closing off at first and not wanting to share the stories about him. So I had to get over that as well. But this is a good reminder for people who want to support someone who's grieving, is to let them know that you're open to hearing to even ask them, I'd love to hear any stories you'd like to share. So you give them the opportunity to tell those great stories, and maybe reassure them that you're not judging. You have no judgments about anything that has happened. That's the thing I didn't know. I assumed that everyone would judge my dad,
Mhm.
and it was too painful for me to hear that.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to talk about is saying their name. One of the big things that I found was people were very uncomfortable saying my son's name, and it wasn't because they didn't care. It was just because they were unsure of how I would react. And so I always like to say their name. I am still Stephen's mom, even though Stephen is not here physically anymore. And I am a proud mama. So say his name. And so, what do you say to that concept of people not being afraid to say their name and keep them alive in spirit with the people who have lost them?
I think that's so important. And I think the very fact, I mean, I that people agonize over, oh, should I ever bring up Stephen? Will that just cause more pain? I probably shouldn't say anything. I shouldn't talk about it because I don't want to cause more pain. It that tells us just how elementary our understanding of grief is, in a way, as a society, because we have these beliefs in our society, like about what would hurt someone who's grieving, when in fact it's exactly the opposite. And it's because we've made grief kind of a taboo subject for such a long time. People have no idea what's okay to say or not.
Mhm.
But you're so right, because if people don't mention the name and don't ever bring up the person who has died, it feels as if they've erased that person, as if somehow they didn't exist and their existence didn't matter. And what we want more than anything is for our loved ones' lives to have mattered and have meaning and purpose. And that's what we have found. And we want to share that and tell other people about it, and how the name itself is associated with that meaning and the value and the worth of their existence, and the fact that they were here with us.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, I wanted to switch directions a little bit, and ask you. There's so many people. Like for me, I I see butterflies as kind of symbolism for me. And there's so many people who have ideas when they lose someone of kind of spiritual symbols that kind of show up and serve as reminders. So and I mean, I think I researched, and like right back to Roman times, there's examples of people with butterflies, cardinals, ladybugs. There's and in the more current times, like dimes and pennies and all those things. What's your experience about that? What have you heard about that and people talking about it?
I hear a lot of stories, and which I love hearing about. And again, even in my own experience, after my dad died, um, I went to his graveside uh, before we left. Before we left home after his funeral, I went to visit the grave site and sat at his grave and just cried, because it was the first time I was by myself and able to just openly cry. And I suddenly became aware that there was a meadowlark sitting on a fence near my dad's grave that had been singing the entire time that I was there. And the meadowlark stayed there and kept singing and singing and singing. And the significance is, I grew up in Wyoming, and the meadowlark is the state bird, and we would hear it all the time. We spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting and fishing, always would hear meadowlarks. And my dad loved the meadowlark and the song the meadowlark would sing. And so it was like, it, I didn't, I honestly didn't hear the song until I was ready to leave. And then I suddenly realized, oh, wait, that's been there the entire time I've been here. That meadowlark has been there singing, and I didn't notice it. But in that moment, I thought, that's a message from Dad. And from then on, I see photographs of meadowlarks, or I hear the song somewhere. And I, for me, it's just this. My heart sings. I just feel this touch from my dad, and such a strong connection to that. And I totally, I totally believe that. Um, I totally believe in those signs. And I've heard so many stories of people. Feathers is one that I've heard of, people finding feathers in various places.
Yeah.
And one woman who randomly, someone left roses on her doorstep, but it was on her birthday, and her husband had always given her roses. I don't know, lots of just so many beautiful stories.
I have heard so many too, and it just fills my heart. And I know, like, I love mowing the lawn. It's one of the things I love to do. And I know people probably think I'm weird for doing it, but I do. It's like it's like almost like a meditation for me. And I get the greatest joy when a butterfly shows up. So I always look at it like the blue butterfly is my son Steven, and then the yellow butterfly is my sister Jen. And my husband laughs with me and he's like, "Hey, Jen," or "Hey," because it's kind of come into this. It's very normalized for us now, but it does bring such comfort to your heart. And I truly do believe that we receive those messages. And I love that more and more people are becoming open to that belief. Um, so to close out, I want you to leave our audience with, just some nuggets of wisdom about death, about dying, healing, and renewal, um, and how they can apply, your wisdom to their own brokenness that they may be facing right now. So they're if they're grieving, which many of our listeners are. I work a lot with the bereaved community. So, what can you say to them, and leave them with?
I guess the first thing would be to recognize that um, every one of us will grieve at some point in our lives. And so you're not alone. It's a natural part of life that everyone else is going through, even though each person has their own unique experience with grief and their unique journey with it. And to find the courage I think of it as walking into the grief For a while, I was trying to get around the grief or over it or under it or somehow avoid the grief any way I possibly could. And that if you're able to just face it, just go forward into the grief and allow the pain to come, it will actually begin opening you right away, and you will begin to feel this more positive aspect of grief sooner than you even imagine. You'll be able to let in some of the joy and see some of the light a little bit during those dark times if you allow yourself to just experience the pain, allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to feel all of the emotions that are there, because sometimes we hide from the anger that can be there as well,
Mm.
and other emotions attached with grief. So allow all of it to be present, and have a sense of trust, in a sense that this is a process that is reshaping you. And so the other thing I realized when I was grieving is that I didn't want to change. I wanted to try to go backwards. I wanted to go back to being the person I was before my dad died. But in fact, these these powerful experiences are meant to change us. They're meant to reshape us and to form who we are becoming. And so allow yourself to change. Allow grief to make you into a new person, because it's actually you're becoming more of your true self
Mm.
when you allow the grief to do its work and to be part of you and to be part of your heart, and know that you'll carry it always. It will always be part of you. But this new person that you become will have so much more compassion and be able to connect more deeply with other people.
Mm.
And so, in the midst of the darkness, just know that you are not alone. And there's so many of us out here who are trying to shine a light in hopes that you can see just a glimmer of it to help you keep going.
That is beautiful. So, how can our listeners find you? And I want them to tell us how they can find your books, and especially your podcast, which is wonderful, and how they can connect with you and your work.
I have a website. It's eoluniversity.com, and that stands for End of Life University. That's the name of my podcast. And the podcast has a separate website, but you can find it through EOL University. The books are there as well. You can get the books through any bookstore if you go in and ask for them by name, but they're all listed on the website. To click on the books tab, and you'll see them there, and you can find where to buy them.
Perfect. Karen, it's been such a great pleasure and honor to have you just talk to us about, the beauty that can come from an end of life experience, and the clarity that comes from grief. It's such an important topic, and I know that your words will help so many of our listeners. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Okay, all right, you guys, we'll talk to you again next time. Thank you for joining me today on Broken Beautiful Me. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and insightful. Remember, every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message of hope and resilience to more people like us. Don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends and family. Together, we can create a community of strength and beauty in our brokenness. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and keep shining.